is awesome, and yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Well, that was more introduction than I was expecting. That was kind of stole the show there with that intro. She just mic dropped and walked off after the applause started. Okay, thank you very much for that. So my name's Chris, hold the applause, and I am really happy to be here. I do a lot of speaking, actually, around the country on a book that I wrote a couple of years ago called Disrupting for Good, and sometimes it's nice, honestly. With COVID, I haven't been able to speak, so I've been doing tons of virtual speeches, and it's not the same. The energy is not the same. Even a smaller group like this is just having people that you can see face to face, and you don't have to pause on your Zoom jokes and hope that they're laughing because you don't know, because you don't know. So, and my love language is words of affirmation, which makes speaking virtual. I've learned, I didn't know this about myself, but I derive so much joy after a speech from people coming up. I'm not asking you to do this. But when I speak in larger audiences, I really love that people come up and they want to talk to me, and say why something resonated with them. And you just lose that on virtual. It's like you log off and your speech just went out into the abyss, and you're like, oh man, I hope those people are happy. So it's really nice. This is the first time I've spoken like this face to face since March probably. So it's a crazy time, as I know all of you are experiencing. So my biggest challenge tonight is going to be how to say all the things in 45 minutes. So I actually teach a business class at A&M called Using Business to Solve Social Problems, which is fun to teach for a lot of reasons. It's also funny because I've never taken a business class in my life, so I think it's fascinating still that I get to teach a business class, but I'm wrapping up my 11th semester doing that. And so I'm kind of thinking through the lectures that I go through the semester and talking about how do I think about some of those things that seem to resonate most with my students as I talk about my own story. So I grew up here in College Station. I was actually 4 years old when we moved to College Station in 1986. Very different town than it is now. So when I was a kid, Rock Prairie was far South College Station. I mean, that's where the baseball fields were. I was a big baseball player growing up. And I mean, it was like you had to load the wagon and bring the family on Oregon Trail if you were going to go to Rock Prairie. So now to think about the fact that Rock Prairie is in many ways considered sort of central College Station is really fascinating. So the town has obviously changed a lot. I grew up going to a church here in College Station. It was in Bryan, pretty dogmatic church. Had a lot of really good people in the church, but it was definitely some of the things that I learned and that I understood about faith and God and the Holy Spirit and just what it means to be a person of faith. Probably some of those were not the most positive messages, a lot of legalism, and just understood God to be a lot of rules and not a relationship. And so for me, that started to change in high school. And I was a tough kid in high school and even before that, but sort of had my faith transformation late in high school and decided I wanted to do ministry. So I started here at A&M, ended up transferring to ACU in Abilene, where I got both my bachelor's and master's in preaching, homiletics. And that was great, but I was a terrible pastor. So I was a youth pastor first, decent at that, then a preaching pastor, terrible at that. Because it turns out, as Preston could tell you, that you don't just have to be able to preach well to be a good pastor, you have to actually be able to put up with people's shenanigans. And church folks have lots of shenanigans, and they like to talk and argue and go to meetings about stuff that did not feel important to me as a 25-year-old. And so that was fine. It was fine. So I didn't know it at the time, but I was preaching at a church in Dallas and probably had some mild depression and just was not enjoying what I was doing. Read a book about child trafficking in 2009 and we were pregnant with our first baby, little girl, and we knew we were going to name her Micah. And we'd already been praying over my wife's belly every single night that this little girl of ours, still 10 years later, that she'd be a woman of justice and mercy. And I remember reading that book and thinking, man, what kind of parent asks their child to be something that they're not willing to be? I mean, how can we raise a daughter and ask her to be a woman of justice and mercy if when we see chances to be full of justice and merciful that we're not responsive? It feels like an unfair burden to place on our children to ask them to do what we didn't have the courage to do. And so I Googled the author's name, and this was 2009, found her phone number. I called her, asked her if I could go to Africa with her to meet some of these trafficked children. And 3 months later, I got off a plane in Ghana, Africa, and went out on the world's largest man-made lake called Lake Volta. Met little boys and girls who'd been sold into the fishing industry for as little as $20 that worked on fishing boats 14 hours a day. And I was just crushed. I mean, I think the word you would use is shook. I was just completely shook, both in a beautiful and terrible way, which would kind of become a theme of my life and ministry from there. Just that all of us are this just really, unusual but predictable mix of both beautiful and messy, each one of our lives. But that was so clear to me on that trip to Ghana, that here I was sitting in a fishing boat, meeting these little kids, and it was the most terrible thing that I'd ever witnessed, and also one of the most holy spaces I'd ever been in. And so I came home from that trip, and I was still pastoring the church. We started raising money to try to help the kids in Ghana, give it to another organization. And I went back to Ghana 2 more times in about 9 months. We raised about $75,000. I was pretty good at fundraising back then even. And in that time, I realized nobody was really getting at the root cause of the problem in Ghana. It was the solutions didn't match the complexity of the problem. And so it felt like no one was really... This is a theme, by the way, in nonprofit ministry that I think needs to be rectified in our lifetime. And that is that we're generally in ministry not great about trying to work ourselves out of jobs. And that really should be the goal. Instead of protecting our jobs, we should always be entering any problem solving with the goal of working ourselves out of that job. Because Lord knows there's always going to be new problems that we can go solve. I don't know why we'd ever imagine there wasn't something else we could go do if we happened to solve one problem completely. But that's neither here nor there for tonight. But I came to a crossroads, and that was, do we keep trying to help in Ghana and really double down? Or do I just walk away and feel like, hey, we did more than most people? And so we did the first of those two. And I quit my job as a pastor September 1st, 2010. I started Mercy Project. And so we just had our 10-year anniversary last month, September 1st of last month. So it's been a crazy journey. It's been super hard and terrible and wonderful and holy. And God has been super faithful the whole time. So this isn't a Mercy Project speech, so I won't go all the way into it. But essentially what we've done is we teach these fishermen how our process, which is pretty unique, is we teach these fishermen how to do aquaculture or cage fishing. So we've actually replaced the need for the child labor. So these fishermen make about 16% more per family on average than they do with the labor of the kids, which allows them to voluntarily release the kids to go back to their families because they can make more money without the kids than with them. And so through that process, we've brought those cages to about 5,000 rural Ghanaians and rescued and reintegrated 181 kids back into their families. And those kids all go to school. And, we hope and pray and trust that they'll become the next leaders of Ghana. So that's what I've been doing for about 10 years. And in that time, we had 4 kids. So Micah's the oldest. She's 11. We also adopted a little boy, and very much a story I don't have time or emotional capacity for tonight. But we adopted a little boy from Ghana and then actually reunited him back with his family in Ghana, which was never the plan. After 2 years, he was here in America with us for 2 years, and now he's back in Ghana. So we have 4 kind of 5 kids. It depends on who asks me. I try not to, I say 4 if it's somebody I don't know because I don't want to get into the story. But anyone who's known us for a while knows our son. His name was Famous, which was a very fitting name. He had quite the reputation. His time here in America touched a lot of people's hearts with his story. So he'll be 15 in December. So he was 7 when he was here, 7 to 9, and then he went back to Ghana about 5 years ago. So that's what Mercy Project's doing. So, but what's fun for me is that I've had a really unique opportunity over the last several years to not just do Mercy Project. So I learned really early on in the life of Mercy Project that one of the things God had made me to do and to be was to be entrepreneurial. I loved solving problems. I loved helping people, and I loved doing many things. I get bored very easily. And while we were having a lot of success with Mercy Project, even from the very beginning, I was sort of scratching this entrepreneurial itch. So I started the BCS Marathon here in town, which also will have its 10th year this December, which is disruptive to your church every year, and so I'm very sorry for that. But the upside is that this year we'll give away our $1,000,000th to local children's charities. So a teeny tiny little price to pay, one Sunday a year. And for me, honestly, the BCS Marathon is a lot of fun for a lot of reasons. But to me, the BCS Marathon is a ministry. Even though many runners may not be people of faith, I think that because they come and they get to experience something bigger than themselves, the finish line of the race is lined with the faces of the children that we've rescued in Ghana with proceeds from the marathon. And so I believe firmly that people may not call it faith, but they can still participate in the kingdom when we invite them to do that. And so I think that the marathon every year is a chance for thousands of people who may or may not know Jesus intimately to participate in the kingdom with us and to do good. And so I started the BCS Marathon. That kind of birthed other races around town. We do the Turkey Trot every Thanksgiving, several other races, kind of a race series around that. And then started a business about 5 years ago that does social media for small businesses. So it's kind of when businesses were realizing, oh gosh, we really should be doing stuff on Facebook. It was Facebook at the time, and now, Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and all the things now. But businesses were they were typically 40 and 50-year-olds running the businesses, and they didn't even have their own Facebook accounts, or they barely had a Facebook account, but they knew they were being told you need to do this. So I saw a market opportunity there, and I started that business, and that's been great. And still have that business. And then I do some real estate investing in town, and wrote a book about 2 years ago called Disrupting for Good. And so I've gotten to travel around and speak to tons of different organizations, Boys and Girls Clubs, like National Boys and Girls Club Conference, American Hospital Association, kind of random groups that are having big conferences and events that want to bring somebody in to kind of do a rah-rah inspirational speech. And so I was doing a lot of that before COVID, and there's other random stuff, but it's neither here nor there. So I like dabbling. I like doing a lot of things. I'm finishing my second book right now, which is called 1 Billion Hours of Good. And I'm pretty excited about that. It'll launch in June. And it's really a call for each of us to give what we have, where we have it, and when we have it, which is now. And basically to stop waiting to do good, and to stop thinking that you need to get to X point if you make this money or have this time, but to choose to give what we have, where we have it. And so I've done some fun stuff around that book, sort of challenging people to give 1% of their time, which is 14.4 minutes a day, which over your working life adds up to something like 3,000 hours, which is a year and a half of full-time work, which most of us could never imagine giving that much time without getting paid for it. But when you do it in 14-minute increments, these little micro decisions to do good every day where you are with what you have, then it can create this massive transformation in scale. So the idea is that people will pledge. They'll take this pledge to give 1% of their time, 14.4 minutes a day, until it adds up to enough people that it's a collective billion hours of good. That's the idea. So that movement will commence in June. So we'll launch the book in June, and then I'll go on a big, hopefully with COVID, I'll go on a big speaking tour and try to get people excited about that and committed to that. So yeah, so that's my story in brief. My first ministry experience, though, which I kind of skipped, my first love, when I was 19, three crazy things happened in about 6-month period. The first was that I ran my first marathon, so I'm an avid runner. I was chasing a girl, to be super honest, and she was running a marathon, so I told her I was going to run a few miles with her in Austin, and I just ended up running the whole marathon, which was horrific, and I couldn't walk for days. And I distinctly remember I had an intramural softball game, and I literally had to hit the ball like to the fence to just walk to first base because I was walking so slow the next day. I mean, it was bad. But I finished that marathon, and it was a great lesson that our bodies are so much more capable than we give them credit for. And then a couple months later, this was all my freshman year of college. So that was February. I was here at A&M. A couple months later, I ran for mayor of College Station, and I got 3rd place out of 5 candidates in that election. So that was cool, and I surprised a lot of people, myself included, in how well that went. And then a couple months after that, I had gone to work that summer at a camp for inner city kids, and the camp director that was there was leaving, and so the board asked me to direct that camp for inner city kids, even though the guy before me had been full-time and like in his mid-20s, and I was 19 and a full-time college student. They saw something in me and invited me to apply for that job, and then chose me for the job, which I still can't believe that they did that, but that kicked off 4 years for me, which were just really, really rich in doing urban ministries, basically a camp for kids who couldn't afford to go to camp. And it was super hard and super awesome. And I mean, we're like searching the kids' bags for weapons when they show up at camp, removing weapons and drugs from their bags before they can go to their cabin. And it was just like the most, it was incomparable just to see them soften and experience unconditional love for a week. And, even simple things like every week without fail. We had new kids every week for 8 weeks. Some kid would eat himself or herself sick because they just weren't sure when they would get to eat again. They just didn't quite trust that there would be food the next day, and so they would literally make themselves sick because they were just like, who knows when I'll eat again, and so doing that for 4 summers. I had 50 college-age staff that worked for me, and that was amazing. So that was really my first experience with ministry. And then I came back here when I was in school, still doing that job, and worked at the Boys and Girls Club in College Station, which was awesome, and got to really dig in with the families. And then when I was a youth pastor here in town, my wife taught at a low-income school in Bryan. And so we got to really dig in with those families. So, I always tell people I wasn't looking for Ghana. People sometimes like to fuss about, international ministry when there's so many domestic ministries. And yeah, that question used to really bother me when I was first started Mercy Project. I felt really defensive when people would ask me that question. Always seemed like the people asking that question weren't really doing much domestic ministry themselves, which always seemed really confusing to me also. But, I think where I landed on that is, if I'm talking to a non-religious person, I'll just say, I didn't choose Ghana. Ghana chose me. But if I'm talking to religious people, I'm like, we don't get to decide. God has you read a book about child trafficking and respond to it. I wouldn't have chosen Ghana probably either. It's a really long plane ride over and over again, And it's not even the beautiful part of Africa. It's West Africa. People always ask if there's safaris, and there's not. There's goats and there's chickens in Ghana. So it's not even Kenya or Uganda, which has the beautiful safaris. So, I probably wouldn't have chosen either. But the truth is, in the kingdom of God, there are no zip codes, and suffering has no zip codes, certainly. And so we go where people need us to be kind and loving to them, and to show up and stand with them when they're all alone. So that's what we did with Mercy Project. So I didn't expect to go to Ghana. It wasn't in my career path. I didn't take some test in high school or college that said I was probably going to, move and do something or go do something like Mercy Project. To be totally honest, I graduated high school 40th percentile in my class. Completely unimpressive in every way. No college scholarships. Only way I could get into A&M was by doing A&M and Blinn team program. I was the very first group that ever did the team program, which was great. It was a great program, but at the time I would have preferred to be A&M, only, but there's no way with my GPA and my, SAT. I mean, I was completely average in every single way. So there was no indication that I was going to be able to accomplish some of the things that I was able to accomplish, but God was just really super gracious, and I guess if I've done anything well, it's just to try to keep showing up and keep saying yes. And, sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, but never works when you don't say yes, and never works when you run the other way because it gets hard. So certainly my wife has had a huge role in my faith journey. We met when we were 18 and 16. And she taught me how to sing the melody because she has a lovely voice, and I did not know how to sing the melody of any song. And so we would sit on her porch swing in College Station, and she would just sing the melody of a song until I could hear that I was singing with her. And that's how we fell in love in youth group. And so she really named a lot of truths in me that I had never seen and that really I didn't believe, and sort of called out those things in me, not who I was, but what I could become. And that was really transformational for me. So we broke up for a little while and then hooked back up when I went to ACU. And in spite of both of our insistence that would not happen when I got to ACU, we were engaged 9 months after I showed back up at ACU, after a terse conversation that we would absolutely not date again, and that season was over for us. It was not, and here we are. So all those things have been super transformational for me, and I think, man, there's just so many things I would love to say to you guys. My class at A&M, we just they wanted to do an AMA with me last class session. So they sent me all these questions, and I answered 30 or 40 questions that they had, which were everything from, money, finances, marriage, children, nonprofits, business ideas. All kinds of stuff. Super fun. But, I think that I love working with college students. I said, I'm teaching my 11th semester of that course, and it's the highlight of my week, every single week, to get to be with my college students. And, the question I get asked most often probably is, what advice would I have for, college students? That's what my students like to say, what would you say to college students? Or, what did you wish somebody had told you in college? Or what would you have done differently? Some variation of that. And, I can't really talk about faith with my class. Obviously, I think they all probably perceive that I have some deep faith conviction just by my hope, by my life. But so I can't answer the question, that way. And so a lot of what we're talking about is about business, and it's about, doing the right thing. But I do talk a lot with my students about their North Star. So my first lecture every semester is around our North Star, and sort of an overused phrase, but overused and under-leveraged. So what I like to remind my students is that we all have some principles that guide us, something that we sort of prioritize over and above everything else. And that doesn't always match what we say is our guiding principle or our North Star. It doesn't always match what is actually our guiding principle or our North Star. And, it's one thing to say that X is the most important thing in your whole life. And it's another thing to take somebody's credit card statements and calendar and to validate if that thing really is the very most important thing to them, because where we spend our time and where we spend our money will say what we value the most. And for myself included, even I'm 38 years old and, have a wonderful life, a wonderful family. Like, I have to be really careful still to this day. Every several months, I have to just be mindful of, like, am I still following that North Star? Like, do my time and money still support that whatever I've determined to be the most important thing to me is actually the most important thing? And so my encouragement to you would be to be super honest with yourself about what is that North Star for you. And I think the easy answer, of course, Sunday school answer is like, Jesus is my North Star. And it's like, okay, that's a great answer. It's going to be hard to argue with that. Let's take that a bit further and say, what does life with Christ look like from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed? Because it's one thing to say, like, Jesus is my North Star, but that has to play out in real life. And I don't know what that means. If that means feeding the poor, I don't know if that means walking alongside children who've been abused, if that means really digging into your friendships and going for depth over width. I don't know what that means for you, right? It's going to mean your gifts and your passions are going to be completely different than my gifts and my passions, and it would make no sense for me to tell you that you should do what I do and that I should do what you do. That doesn't make sense. But what I would encourage you is to be honest about that North Star, and then to be honest about if your calendar and your credit card statements support that what you say is the most important thing to you, if that thing is really the most important. And that shouldn't bring up any shame or guilt. I grew up in a church environment where shame and guilt were used as tools to try to get me to be more faithful. That does not work, by the way. And so I don't say that in a way of shame or guilt. I say that in a way of just self-reflection. I mean, the way, if we want our North Star to be our priority, then we would want our time and money to support that North Star. And if not, then we have to make a decision. Do we want to choose a different North Star? Or do we want to change the way we spend our time and the way we spend our money to support the thing that matters the most to us? But my experience is that the vast majority of my college students are doing lots of living without lots of reflecting. And we fall into patterns and habits of doing what college students are supposed to do. And we join the clubs that we're supposed to join, and we're part of the organizations in our college that we're supposed to be a part of. I think business students especially fall into this trap. But I think all students have this, even with church. It's like we do what we sort of feel like, oh, well, this is what my church does. And I think it's okay to do those things. Those are good things. But I'm not always convinced that they're the right things for you and for, not church, I'm saying broadly. All the things we say yes to out of duty or obligation, I'm not always convinced that they're the right things. And so I think it's great exercise to take a look. I mean, you're coming up, getting near the end of your semester now, right? You're 2/3 probably through the semester, I would guess, at this point by calendar weeks. And don't you register for classes in a week or so, 10 days, I think? And it's a great time to look at the spring and to be honest about, like, are you spending your time and your money and your energy onto the things that you really care the most about, that really make you feel most alive, that make you feel like you could do those things and you're less tired when you finish than when you started? And, those things that make us feel the most alive, there's a reason that those things make us feel most alive. It's not accidental or happenstance. We should seek those things out and then do them as often as we can. And it doesn't mean we don't do our real life obligations. We still have to take that accounting class we don't want to take, or whatever that poli-sci class is that we've already Q dropped twice, whatever that thing is, right? Like, we still have to do the hard things. I have a whole chapter in my book actually about doing hard things. And I think it's a huge challenge in current American culture that we've put our whole lives are around making our lives easier and more comfortable. And we don't actually know how to be uncomfortable anymore. And the problem is that comfortability or uncomfortability is a muscle, and when we don't exercise it, then we become really bad at being uncomfortable. And so the first time we meet adversity and something doesn't go our way, we crumble because we're not used to things not going our way. It's nobody's fault, but it is good for us to be aware of that. So I think you still need to do those hard things, but in the numerous hours that we have extra, it's such a great opportunity for us to be honest about what kind of people we want to be and what kind of story we want to live. And you don't have to wait until you're out of college. That's a farce. You don't have to, because the truth is you're going to get out of college and you're going to get your first job, and then you're going to say, well, I need to get a little money in my bank account. I need to pay off my student loans, and then I'll do that thing I really love. And then you're going to pay off some of your student loans, and you're going to get that second job. And then if you end up getting married, you're going to say, well, I need to, I just got married. And then you're going to maybe have a kid. And you're like, well, we just had this kid. And then your kids are going to get bigger. You're always going to find the next thing. And you have to make a decision that you're going to pursue those things that make you feel most alive, not because you think you're going to find a bunch of random extra time at some point in your life, but because you're going to make the time to do those things that make you feel most alive, and that you can make that time now. You'll never have more free time than you have in college. You can ask anyone who's ever been in college, and they'll tell you this is by far the most free time you'll ever have in your life. And that's a great thing. Like, it's not a knock. It shouldn't make you feel guilty. That's awesome. Like, what a gift. And how will you leverage that gift? Is Netflix what makes you feel most alive? Is sleeping lots and lots and lots of time what makes you feel most alive? I don't know. Video games? I don't know. Maybe that is what makes you feel most alive. But a lot of times we just do those things because we feel like that's what we're supposed to do, or because we don't know what else to do, and we lack a lot of intention and purpose. And we just have this great opportunity. I mean, God's given us this gift. It's not promised to us, as we've seen with COVID the last, 9 months. Whatever we think about COVID and all the rules aside, there's a lot of people that aren't here on earth today because of something that didn't even exist in America, a year ago. And we have this gift that we woke up today, and we have air in our lungs, and we have bodies that are capable and strong, and minds that can think and solve problems. And it's a tragedy when we don't leverage that gift for the kingdom to the fullest. And it's a delight to be able to wake up every day and to choose with intention and purpose to love our neighbors and to love God with the very best gifts that we have. So that'll be my encouragement to you guys. I have no idea if I answered the questions I'm supposed to answer. I think there was one question about like faith, how much does faith play into your life. I mean, I think you can hear it's a pretty important part. My faith journey has been pretty interesting. I'm probably the least traditionally faithful right now than I've ever been in my life. And I think some of that is I'm just tired. I'm fatigued of what it means to be a person of faith in America. I think that's come to mean something that doesn't really resonate with me in a lot of ways. So I think I'm kind of tired. I think that makes me tired. And so I think in some ways I've pulled out of those things that feel predictable, mostly because I feel like I don't fit in those places. And some of that's probably me swinging the pendulum too far. But I'm just being honest about that. But I feel very connected to God when I'm doing service to others. That's the way I feel most in communion with God, which always bothered me. So after I graduated from ACU bachelor's degree, I got a full scholarship to go to Texas Tech Law School. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, to do poverty law. And I showed up at law school, and I'd come out of seminary, basically. I never loved reading my Bible and praying for hours. That was never my thing. And I had all these friends that that was their jam, And this was, I don't know if y'all still do this, but This was like back in the day when college students were like, I'm not saying people were bragging, but like people had like big prayer journals, and like it was like a thing to be like, you know, have you done your quiet time today? It was like a thing. Like, have you brushed your teeth today? Like, I've done one of those two things, and it's none of your business which one it was, you know? And so I was feeling pretty like inadequate. I mean, honestly, because like no matter how much I tried to develop the discipline of just like sitting in Scripture, you know, and sitting in prayer and silence, I just really struggled to do that. And I didn't feel connected to God when I did that. It wasn't like, it just didn't feel like anything was happening, to be honest. And so I got to law school, and I'm sitting there. The first guy I meet is this Mormon guy named Brian. Super devout Mormon, still a friend of mine. His family supports Mercy Project to this day. So we sort of make this agreement with each other. Like, I'd just been in seminary. Obviously, I was not Mormon. He was very faithful Mormon. He'd done his mission, everything. And I was like, hey, I think we could really learn a lot from each other, but I don't think we could ever be who we want to be in this relationship if we feel like the other person's always secretly proselytizing us. So like, can we just make an agreement that like, there's no ulterior motive here? Like, you're comfortable that I'm in a relationship with God, and I'm comfortable that you're in a relationship with God. And like, if I'm ever talking to you about faith, it's not to try to get you to be like me. And if you're talking to me about faith, it's not for you to, you know, and he was like, I'm totally good with that. So I kind of say to him in this conversation early on that I sometimes struggle to feel like I'm connected with God, you know, and that this way that had been sort of almost idolized in my upbringing of quiet time, you know, sort of the idol of spirituality. That like I just really struggle with that, you know, and he like listened to me, and he's like, you know, in the Mormon church, there's a lot of different ways you can connect with God and be close with God. And one of them that we believe is in service to others, is like one of the ways you can be like most closely in communion with God. I was like, man, this Mormon dude just like, basically just like freed me from this burden that I felt, you know, where it was like my way of connecting with God wasn't rich enough, or it wasn't good enough or beautiful enough. And, you know, I've spent my whole life, I mean, I'm 38. I was 19 when I got hired at that camp. I mean, I spent half my life now advocating for people on the margins and showing up for people on the margins. And like, that's where I feel closest to God, and that's where I feel nearest to God. And so I've gotten the chance to do that my whole adult life, which is pretty amazing and a huge gift. So yeah, faith is a big deal to me. It doesn't look like it used to look. And, you know, I'm not in formal ministry like I used to be. I still get the chance I do a couple weddings and funerals every year and get asked to guest preach and stuff. Preston hasn't asked me yet, Mark, by the way. That's Preston, I've been talking about it, but I haven't gotten the invite yet, so I'm just saying. But I love doing that, but I also love that I'm not a full-time pastor. That's not my best gifting. And I've gotten the chance to do a lot of cool stuff, and I hope to help the kingdom come in a lot of ways that I wouldn't have been able to do if I was a full-time pastor, because I've been out of the church just with God's people. And so I have tons of friends still from seminary that are full-time pastors. I'm so grateful for them and their patience, and grateful for Mark's patience and for Preston's patience and for church leaders, because we need people to lead us in church. But I also don't feel like less of a minister because I'm not working at a church. And so it's been a really rich thing for me. So, and the only other question I can remember is about how much of success would I attribute to hard work, faith, and luck. And I mean, this probably gets into like theology we don't need to get into tonight, but I do not think God is just like sitting around waiting for us to do something so she can like give us the luck charm. So I think faithful people have really crappy stuff happen to them all the time. And I think people who aren't faithful have not crappy stuff happen to them all the time. And I don't feel comfortable assigning. I think God is present and near to us. And sometimes he's near to us in our biggest victories. And sometimes he's near to us in our most horrific, saddest, most broken moments. And I think God's nearness is it's a gift. One of the words used, and I'm going to bust out some nerdy Greek here. One of the words used in the New Testament for the Holy Spirit is a word called aribon, and it means like down payment. And I love that idea that the gift of the Holy Spirit is like a down payment. That God was like, okay, you can't fully be engaged with me on this side of heaven, so I'm going to make this down payment. So you have like some tiny sense of like this promise I'm making to you. Like there's more of this, but here's at least a little bit so you know I'm good for what I say. And, I think that's really beautiful. And I believe in the fruit of the Spirit more than I've ever believed in that before. And I think it's important as people of faith in America that we keep calling each other to exhibit the fruit of the Spirit in the way we talk to each other, in the way we talk on Facebook, in the way we talk about politics, in the way we pray and sing, and that we just keep saying, like, is this peace, and is this patience, and is this kindness, and is this goodness, and is this gentleness, and is this self-control? And a lot of times the answer is no. And that's, we need to rectify that and to correct that when it happens. So I would say I think life is a weird, fascinating thing, and I think you can work really hard and be successful, and I think you can work really hard and fail. And I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. I think that life's just hard and tricky, and you just have to keep showing up. And I think showing up is good. I'm a very disciplined person. I'm a big time goal person. I plan everything meticulously, and some of it works and some of it doesn't. But I think you just have to keep showing up, even when it's hard, even when it's cold, even when it's rainy. I ran 10.5 miles this morning in wind and rain and 40-degree weather because I'm running my 26th marathon in January, and I have a goal to run my fastest marathon. And when you're 38, you got to show up on the rainy, cold days when you want to run your best marathon, and you don't get to decide that you always want it to be pleasant weather. And so I try to live my life by showing up. And if that's the only thing you took away from this little time together, I think that would be a great takeaway for you. So I'm done officially. So whatever questions you guys have for me, I'm happy to answer them. Yes? What do you want to be when you grow up? What do I want to be when I grow up? Someone in my class asked me last Thursday what I see myself doing 10 years from now, and I could not answer that question. So if somebody had told me 10 years ago where I'd be today, it would have been unfathomable. I could not have imagined the things that would have happened in the last 10 years, the opportunities that I've had, the people that I've met, just the different things I've been able to do. I wouldn't have dared to dream them. So I don't even want to say what I would like to be doing in 10 years. I think I love writing. I love speaking. I love calling myself and other people to more and to greater things that I think we don't actually really deep down, most of us don't actually believe we're capable of great things. I think we like that idea, but it frightens us. And so, I'd love to be in a place where I'm doing more speaking and writing. And I love nonprofit consulting. Especially, it's one of my passions is helping nonprofits be more sustainable and more creative and thoughtful in the way we solve problems. So I think, I guess that feels kind of like my easy cop-out answer is writing, speaking, and doing nonprofit consulting. But I'm doing a lot of that now, so it kind of feels lame to, to say like I just want to keep doing what I'm doing, but I'm super grateful. I wouldn't change anything about my life at this point. It hasn't all been easy, and my greatest convictions have come out of my greatest pain. And so I wouldn't choose the pain, but I also am certain I wouldn't be who I am without the pain. And so I truly would not choose it or wish it upon anyone else. But I'm also grateful that God is so faithful in his nearness to us, and that somehow, some way, that he can take our brokenness and make it something beautiful. And I don't think it's because he wants us to be broken. I think that's bad theology. But I think he's there in the mess with us, both waiting to pick us up and then to walk with us into newness in ways that we would have never appreciated if we hadn't experienced the brokenness. Yes.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand this right too.
Okay.
With the Mercy Project, you're taking the men who would have been hiring the children, and you're teaching them, right?
Yeah, they do. They own children.
So was that hard for you? I feel like my pride and everything would have just, I mean, I get that it's
Yeah.
But
Yeah, so I think, just so on the video, Mark, so she's asking, look, knowing that the men own the children in Ghana, is it hard to support them and to kind of help them have this good thing? So I think, so the very short answer is no. It's not hard. It's not to say it wasn't always like that. So in the very beginning, the fishermen were painted to me as the bad guys. That's how the story was told. And we love bad guys in America, right? There's always got to be an adversary in every story. And the truth, the more we dug into it in Ghana, was that the bad guy was poverty. And that point was really brought home to me in our first rescue in September 29th was the actual day in 2012. About 750 days after we'd started Mercy Project, that we were doing our first rescue of children from this village called Atavupe. And I don't even know what prompted me to do this, but we're having this ceremony under the mango tree, and the chief is there, and the elders, and the whole village, and they're banging the drums, and it's kind of a celebration because they're sending these kids back home. And so that was cool, and that was beautiful to see that they were kind of launching the kids. But I don't know what prompted me to say this, but I was given a speech or kind of a thing. And I said, how many of you in this village were trafficked children yourselves? And about 75% of the village raised their hands. And that was it for me. Like from that moment on, these were not the bad guys. They were stuck in a vicious cycle of poverty where in a country the size of Oregon in landmass, they have almost 100 dialects because people don't travel around. And so you've got these men who came to fish when they were 5 or 6 years old, that when they're 18 and they could leave, where are they going to go? What are they going to do? They can't speak another dialect. They can't write their own name. They can't count to 10. All they know how to do is fish. And the only way to survive when you make $2 a day fishing is to have a couple little kids who help you on the boat. And so for me, that was just transformational, because it was like, these guys, they would never choose this life. This is a horrible existence. I mean, they're barely making enough money to feed their own families. And so does that make sense? So I mean, it's a very different sort of trafficking, unlike sex trafficking or, red light districts in other countries, or even in America, where there's obviously human trafficking happening as well. There's not sort of this like, lightning rod person who's sort of the person making it all happen. And the other part that I didn't explain, almost all the kids come from really poor families. Almost always a single mom whose husband has either left or died, and she can't afford to feed the kids she has. So she sends the child away, hoping that at least they'll be able to get food so that they don't starve to death. And So when we reunite the family, it's our social. We have 15 Ghanaian staff, and no Americans in Ghana still, which was a really big deal for us. So our Ghanaian staff completely runs the program, which is we have 3 American employees and 15 Ghanaian employees, which was a goal of ours from the very beginning, that we'd have way more Ghanaian staff than American staff. But all that to say, our social workers come alongside these families and really help make sure, like we've never had a child re-trafficked in 10 years. And so we're really doing kind of like in the trenches poverty work with these families, helping them understand how they got into poverty in the first place, helping them with microloans, helping them with health insurance, helping them with budgeting, helping them finding better places to live that are safer and have access to better schools. I mean, we do that like on a one-on-one basis with every family that we work with. So our process is very depth over width. You know, we could have rescued hundreds more kids and put them in an orphanage, but they weren't orphans. And white people love orphanages, you know, like American Christians love orphanages. But, you know, sometimes you need orphanages and sometimes you need to just buckle up and do the really hard work of family reunification. And we felt really compelled for us that family reunification was the way to go. And it's kept us from growing in some ways, right? We could have rescued 500 kids if we weren't spending all the money on the reunification. But for us to be able to lift up an entire family, you know, we have kids that are teaching their parents how to speak English because they come home from school and their parents are like waiting to learn what the kids have learned. And we have kids who every sibling is now in school, even though we're only paying for one. The parents have found the means to send the other kids because they've seen the benefit of the one kid going to school. And so it's I mean, really they're being given the gift of hope. And you know, that's huge for a family in poverty to believe that there's a future does something in their souls that, you know, no amount of food or clothes can do. And so that's been transformational. So that was the longer answer to your question. Yes, everyone.
No, you can
Okay.
So I often think back to this idea of grace and suffering meet at the foot of the cross, right?
Mm.
So in the midst of working with the victims of a broken system, working and discerning where can you move with this restorative process, and you're working in the trenches of this suffering, have you ever felt like you were the grace meeting that suffering at the foot of the cross?
Mm.
Or you and your ministries?
Yeah, probably not. I haven't thought of it in those terms, like us being that grace. I think the way I've probably thought about it more is just what a gift it is to be able to show up when people need us, you know, and to be able to choose to have the freedom financially, physically, emotionally, spiritually, to be able to show up in people's hardest, darkest places and to advocate on their behalf, you know, a lot of people who've never had anyone speak up for them their whole lives and maybe in some ways thought no one ever would, that they weren't worthy of being spoken up for, you know, that they had never experienced that. I think that's obviously a really special gift to be able to be the one that, just like we know Christ advocates for us, and the Holy Spirit advocates for us, that we, because God invites us to help kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, that we get to be sometimes the people who do that for someone else. And that's the way they experience grace, and that's the way they experience transformation. That's the way they experience holiness, is by being cared for and seen and loved in ways that maybe they'd never experienced before. So does that answer your question?
It does. And on this idea of worthiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or lack thereof, do y'all ever encounter situations where you've restored the family, reunified them, but lack of worthiness and that mentality is absolutely a psychologically traumatic problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do y'all ever, work through those psychological implications after?
Yeah, so the kids go to a rehabilitation shelter before they're reunited with their families. So it's about a 3 to 6 month restorative process where they are back with their parents, but in a neutral setting for the first time. And then we sort of are preparing the parents for the reintegration. And so, that's all happening. I think what's 10 years in, it's still hard for me to wrap my mind around. I think what's a real challenge is kids in Ghana do not have the same expectations of parental support as kids in America. So I liken it to maybe your grandparents. Y'all are the age where it would be more your grandparents. Your grandparents' parents were not asking your grandparents about their feelings, right? When your grandparents came in from working in the cotton field, or they weren't how'd that feel to work all day with no water? And your grandparents are I'm really glad you asked that question. I had a lot of feelings out there today. No one was doing that. That's a new phenomena. This is a new, you are identifying and naming your feelings in ways that I wasn't doing even 20 years ago when I was a college student, and in ways that my dad wasn't doing 20 years before that when he was a college student, in ways that his dad wasn't doing before that 20 years ago. So I would say in Ghana, they're still in the 1940s or 50s when it comes to parent-child relationships. Kids just understand, my parents don't have an obligation to make me feel a certain way. I mean, even in Ghana, so my staff, who's all my friend, on Facebook, there's several of them that have children of their own. And they tell me, they say, I watch the way you talk about your children on Facebook, and I'm trying to learn from you because that is so unusual for us. One of our very first staff members, his father was an Episcopal priest, highly, highly regarded. He's passed away, unfortunately, but from everything I understand, just a super man. And that employee, said he can remember on one hand the number of times his father said he loved him. You just don't talk like that to children in Ghana. Parents just don't talk like that. So I'm saying that to you to say the kids aren't coming home with this expectation that they're well, yeah. Mom, what do you have to say for yourself, right? They're look, I'm just glad to be home. You don't owe me anything. Psychologically, they're just look, this is my family. I'm back with my family. I'm just glad to be here. And they don't have, it's I'm not saying this is good or bad, but they've not been taught that they should feel a certain way about what happened to them. And so they don't feel a certain way. But it's they're I guess my mom I guess she couldn't take care of me. And now she can. Okay, I'm back, right? Let's do it. So they don't come in with this baggage of hey, I'm going to need some time to repair this relationship. It's I'm just glad to be home and not working anymore. I'm glad to be able to go to school now. So, and I'm sure there's times when they step out of line pretty quick and their mom's yeah, you're not going to do that here. And the kid's not now, Mom, you can't speak to me like that after all these years of, sending me away. It's not like that. The mom's no, you won't speak like that. You learned that on the lake. That's fine, but don't do that at home. And the kid's yes, ma'am. Right? Okay, my bad, Mom. So I think it's probably a gift that they don't come in with some of those expectations because it protects them some, unlike in America where we would just feel so betrayed, by our parents in a way that they just don't know, right? They just haven't experienced that. So, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted you, if you would be willing to talk about it, your identification and kind of your reflection on what you thought your God calling was, what your calling was versus what you actually found your calling to be. Because I know as a young adult, it's so hard to figure out what you think your calling is versus what it actually is. You're so wrong, and how do you identify that?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. I mean, honestly, I didn't grow up in church culture that was prioritizing calling. So honestly, I'm not like a great Methodist. Like, we go to this church, but I wouldn't call, and I have 2 degrees in ministry, but like, I don't know a ton about Methodism as far as like if calling is something you're talking about from the time you're really young. So I wouldn't even use the word calling. Like, in my language, I would just talk about gifting, right? Yeah. And so I think that we probably, okay, so first, your first question. So I think that for me, I didn't have any language around gifting until late in high school. So no one was using that language with me, first of all. So I think if anyone's ever used that language around you in your life before you're 18 years old, like, just consider that in itself a gift, that anybody's even like naming those things in you. So, but for me, I certainly would have guessed my gifting. By the time I got late into high school, I thought I was going to be a youth pastor, because my youth pastor was so influential on me. And then by the time I got into college and I realized that I had a gift of preaching, and I excelled like in my homiletics classes, that it was like, oh, I should probably be a preacher. Like, I guess that's what I'm best at. It's like the way my brain worked. But I wouldn't say I felt like called in that, I didn't have some moment where I was like, the light shined down on me and I felt like I should be a preacher. The Jordan River, experience. I didn't have anything like that. And then, falling in love with those kids at the camp, I think I just realized that I had a really big heart for the vulnerable. And so, all that kind of merged together into, even when I did youth ministry in Bryan, honestly, like, those kids now are grown. But like, I didn't really do youth ministry. I did urban ministry, and I took my youth group. I can't believe their parents let us do some. We were like at the corner of MLK and 21 with the guys drinking 40s, like delivering pizzas and praying over them and them praying over us. And it was just like, for me, I found Jesus around people that were usually marginalized and unseen. And so that's just what I knew how to do. Like, so with my youth group kids, I was like, hey, we're going to, we didn't do stuff like, we did like a lock-in a year, but like, we were going to soup kitchens and hanging out with the poor and like, but I wasn't, that just felt really natural to me. It was like, that's where I felt most at home. I'll never forget one Christmas Eve when my wife and I were newly married, a couple years into marriage, and we didn't have much money. And we went in downtown Bryan, right off MLK. We found it was Christmas Eve, real cold, night like tonight. And we found a prostitute, and we gave her a couple $100 and asked her to go home. Like, it was just like one of the sweetest moments of my life. But like, that's the kind of thing I would ask my youth group, not a prostitute because their parents would have freaked out, but like we would go into that same part of town and just be hanging out. I got the old ladies in my church to cook pies and brownies for the Twin City Mission Soup Kitchen. And every Wednesday for the last 10 years, I haven't been at that church in 10 years, and those ladies still make pies and brownies for Wednesday lunch at Twin City Mission. So I was doing like urban ministry. Like, that's always going to be my bend. That's always going to be my lean. Like, that's how I see the gospel. Like, that's how I see the world, is through the lens of people on the margins. And I don't know why. I could give you some reasons of why that is. None on video that's going to go onto the internet, but I could give you some reasons why I think that is. But the bottom line is, that's just the lens through which I see the world. And so any of my giftings are going to kind of fall out of that, if you will. So when you talk about, I feel like I'm going to answer your question unsatisfactorily, but I am, let's say with my own children, I have 4 kids, 10, 9, 5, and 3. I'm a lot less concerned with the actual work my children are doing or will strive to do, as much as I am with the way they do that work as it pertains to like loving their neighbors well, right? I mean, I think like we've all had doctors who were incredibly gifted medically, but horrific in the way they treated their patients, right? Like they spoke harshly and they treated us like we're stupid, and it's just like it's a really negative experience. So you can be in a job, a calling that is the right job on paper or academically, and you can still in that job choose not to lead with compassion and with thoughtfulness and with grace and with kindness and with a desire to do good. And so I don't really care what my kids, like, I want to name their gifts in them, but not in a way of like, I think you're called to this work, as much as I think you're most at home with Jesus in these places. And so whatever that looks like for you, I want you to feel freedom to be doing that. Does that make sense? So, I think there are some people that are like clearly from an early age, like, oh, I'm going to be a teacher, or I'm going to be a professor, or I'm going to be a doctor, or whatever. But I think that most of us don't really get that. I think most of us, end up wherever sort of the path of life has us end up. And then in that space, we have to choose to love the people around us really well. And to be honest, when that space we find ourselves in isn't holy anymore, or it's not putting us in our best position to honor God, not because it's immoral, but because we don't feel alive in that job, or we don't feel alive in that major, or we don't feel alive in that ministry. And it's like, not that we should always feel some kind of way, but that we just have to be honest. Say like, oh, maybe this isn't the spot for me anymore, And so I don't know how to answer that question better than that. I'm sorry.
That's a great answer.
I just would say, like, try a bunch of stuff and be reflective on where you feel closest to God and in the work you're doing, and then do more of that. And trust that if that's your heart's desire, you'll find that if that's where you want to be. So I've probably gone way over time. I'm sorry, I have no idea what time it is. Yeah.
How can we be kind for you, your family, the Mercy Project?
Great question. I think COVID's been hard for everybody, every ministry. I'm sure Mark and these guys can tell you. All of you that are on church staff, that it's just a weird time. So everyone's trying to navigate the new normal, and it seems like it's not going to come. What does that even mean, new normal? It's just weird. So I think just, praying that we'll be able to, Mercy Project especially, that we'll be able to kind of navigate. Like, we still can't even go to Ghana right now, like our U.S. staff. Ghana's not letting Americans in because apparently we have like tons of COVID in America, And all these other countries like hardly have. Ghana's had like 150 cases or something the whole time. Like, these guys are over there crushing it. It's not that low, but it's pretty low, very low. I don't even know if it's 1,000 total cases, honestly. It's extremely low. But so, we can't even go to Ghana right now. We're not even allowed in the country. So, like, my operations guy that's usually there every 6 to 10 weeks, like I used to be before he came on board, we can't even go to Ghana right now. So I think that, and yeah, my family, I think COVID's hard for families. I think it's hard for young people. It's hard for you guys. It's hard how do you navigate being prudent and responsible, but also not socially cutting yourself off in a way that makes you feel, disconnected. So I think just praying that we'll keep being able to find that balance and be good stewards of the freedom we do have to choose, to choose good, kind things, even when it feels annoying or frustrating, and we kind of all wish we could just pretend it wasn't happening, but here we are. It is happening. It is surging again, so who knows what that will mean for the next few months. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate the thoughtfulness of that question. I'm happy to. I'd be grateful to receive your prayers and Mercy Project as well. All right, any last questions? Yes, thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much.